Chris Panagiotu, welcome to the Comfort, Peace, and Freedom podcast. How are you, my man?
Ken, I am doing fantastic. It is the day after my birthday, so there is no place I would rather be on my first day of being 32 than on your show.
That's great. So I'm not going to ask you. You look like you're what, 27, 28? How old are we now?
Yeah, well, I'm 32, but it's funny you say that because I've had people say, like, when they come into my office, they guess that I'm like in my mid 40s. But it's then because they'll ask, like, how old are you? Because it's kind of that weird question. And I'm offended by it. And so then I tell them, okay, I'll give them the hint that, I've invested for now 22 years and, advised and planned and all that. And so then they kind of work backwards, like, he's got to be mid 40s. And, I mean, I haven't said 32 yet, but I'd be like, yeah, I'm 31 or 30. And they're like, God, what is wrong with, like, it's such a weird thing. So, but yeah, I'm the big 3-2, in many ways going on 12. And in other areas, I'm really close to filing for Medicare because I am like such an old soul.
Well, that's great. So really excited to talk to you. This is such a great subject, and I think it's one that is so underserved out there. So kind of want to jump right into it. For those of you out there, Chris wrote an amazing book, Capitalize Your Finances, and his initials are CAP. So he goes by Cap, which is really cool. And I wanted, before we get into the book, because I think there's a lot of great stuff that we can share there without giving too much of it away, because I want people to read it. So many of these things should have been taught in high school, I think. And I'd like to know specifically, you mentioned that you had your first internship with a big, financial company when you were, I think it was 18. Can you tell us about growing up a little bit and give the listeners a little bit of background about who you are and how you got to this place?
Yeah. So, at the beginning, like I said, started investing when I was 10. And I remember I took a stock course. It wasn't really a course. It was like a 6 to 8 week project. I went to a private school. They did not teach you that in public school. And I remember teaching some of my friends about it because at that time I'd been investing for 4 years. And by no means was I, a prodigy. I never think of myself as that. But I kind of knew what was going on, and how the wheels started to really churn and burn was locally. There was a parent that has done very well, and he came home as a Friday afternoon, and we're talking stocks, and he was just stunned by that. And so what ended up happening was we ended up sitting down. Now you got to understand, I had a very pressing to do that afternoon because Halo had just come out. And so all my friends are downstairs playing Halo. I don't want to talk to this dad, but like, he's chatting my ear off because he met with his advisor. And, growing up, I grew up in a very financially literate household. My mom was a teacher. I have no relation with my father anymore, nor do I desire to, but he was a CPA and attorney, and he basically worshipped Warren Buffett, and to an unhealthy degree. And so that's kind of how I got a toe dipped in, but he didn't really like guide me in that route. I just naturally fell in love with what is now capitalizing your finances, but at the time it was investing. And so I never really read like financial statements because I couldn't. We didn't have E-Trade or Robinhood back then. I had to call in between classes to make trades because I was a minor. And so this parent said, hey, here's my portfolio. It was like $8 million. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this money in my life. And he goes, what would you do with this? And I kind of looked at I didn't know how to read any of it. And so I just said, let me just kind of tell you my thoughts. And he told me that I should do this when I get older. And, growing up, it's funny. My father always said that advisors were like the lessest of the professionals, like the used car salesman. And so I always thought, oh, well, I'm never going to do that because that's like what lesser professionals do.
Sure.
And this guy looked me dead in the eye and he's like, dude, I have a team run by someone like you. And I'm just going to tell you, like, this is a sliver of what I'm working with. I'm like, okay, if this guy's got a sliver, his sliver is $8 million. Like, I'm going to listen to this guy. Well, you fast forward, I took his advice at 18, started Union Bank of Switzerland, and a couple of days in, he's walking out of his advisor's office. He looked at me in cube 3 and he goes, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "I took your advice." And then he actually hired me on the spot. So that's like how things really started taking off. And so for me, again, going back to how I got into it, growing up, I was surrounded by a business professional, financially literate household, but I was never really taught directly a lot of things. You're just kind of surrounded by it and you're throwing a bunch of stuff up on the wall and seeing what sticks. It could be very similar to, I don't know if you ended up teaching your daughter Nicole about what you do specifically, but if she's around it enough, you can kind of put 2 and 2 together. That's kind of where it was at. The difference is in blue collar, it's very black and white. It's like, oh, what did my dad do today? You're right. He built this building.
Sure.
There's no like ambiguity to it. And in finance, it's very ambiguous. And so I guess long story short, that's how I got into what I'm doing today. That's how I got kickstarted.
So you're kind of a student of the 10,000 hour thing, where it was just kind of around you all the time. And
yes,
where they talk about 10,000 hours to being an expert at almost anything.
Yes.
So you feel like that kind of happened as you grew up. And was it numbers that fascinated you, or was it helping people to grow something, or was it, building someone's comfort zone into, wow, my money is going to be able to retire me someday? I mean, what was the attraction to the financing piece for you?
It's a good question, and it's evolved over time. So this may come as a shocker to you, but when you're 10 years old, you don't have a lot of money. Yeah. And so when you're super young, you're very, shall I say, mentally moldable. And as a guy, when you throw in testosterone and puberty with testosterone, and you look at the dopamine cars and all that, yeah, I mean, you're going to be so easily influenced by basically the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of finance. And I remember at 18, when I started, I saw a lot of these advisors, and looking back, it was just so cocky and just it's so gaggable, because these guys, basically just throw it out there like, dude, I make a shit ton of money. And I'm like, oh, that like, now knowing what I know, that's so bad. But back then you have no idea.
Sure.
And I was attracted to that because I'm also in the beliefs of I always want to, what's the common thing in America? Like, we always want to do better than what we had growing up for our future generations.
Sure.
So you want to go that route. Well, I had a pretty good life, so I'm like, oh man, like I gotta get going.
Yeah.
And
big
so
shoes to fill.
Yeah, so that drew me in initially, but then what started happening was when I completed college, I was at UBS. I quickly realized, this is going to sound very influencery of me, but like, I wasn't fulfilled. And also I wasn't doing what was right. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just knew. And so then I jumped to Morgan Stanley, same thing. And frankly, I needed the money, and they sold a salesman on getting me there. And after these 2 firms, it's funny, I've blocked out a couple things in my life. And one of those instances was from, God, it must have been December of 2014 through May of 2015. I don't remember any of it. And it was the heart of when I was at Morgan Stanley. I was miserable. In fact, the only things I can really remember, and it wasn't like suicidal, but like, there's a bridge in downtown Tacoma, and every lunch I would just walk out there and just kind of stare at the water, because I'm like, there's nothing. I've got this nice suit. I've got this office. Like, I'm the youngest advisor in corporate America. I don't want any of it. and I'm not doing, like, something wasn't there. And so then in May of 2015, when I discovered the previous firm I was at, Lucia Capital Group, before I spun off and started Capitalize Your Finances, they were a family firm, and they gave me a chance to learn. Now, what does that mean? That can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. I think it's the most valuable gift you can give someone. For me, I learned, okay, there's this thing called financial planning. I kind of knew what it was, but then people had the letters, but they weren't really doing it. And then I said, okay, this family gave me the platform to kind of just go do whatever I want to do under their umbrella. So I entrepreneurially built myself up,
Love
and
it.
it was the best, man. I mean, the hustle was just disgusting. Like, I think for 2 years, what I did, I'd go to 6 networking events a week. That was my goal. And then, sun up, sun down, any time in between meetings, I would be reading, research, and I would sleep at my office Monday through Friday. I would have 2 conference room chairs, and then I would just gather all of my clothes for the week. And then Saturday I'd go home, cry, do all of my laundry. Sundays, I'm a man of faith. I've never really done anything on Sundays, nor do I plan on doing it. And then I rinse and repeat. And those were some of the most miserable days and some of the best days of my life.
Right.
But that's when it started.
I love the entrepreneur part of that, because for the people out there listening, you don't necessarily have to own your own place in order to feel like you do. You just have to have a platform or a vehicle or a way that you can create what you want for yourself with and through somebody else's platform, network, or company. And that's the genius. That's the genius of those people that establish those cultures, is the fact that they can cultivate people like yourself who feel like they own their own place, but they're just working within the framework of somebody else's. So, again, entrepreneurship is amazing. I wholeheartedly approve of entrepreneurship. It's what I do. Don't be afraid to be an entrepreneur for a while until you become that entrepreneur. That's the great path to getting there. So you open Capitalize Your Finances. You have your own folks, and then you decide one day, I'm going to be an author. Okay.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, when I wrote my book, I have so many people now, especially since it had some success, became a bestseller, eternally grateful for all of that. I have so many people calling me and asking me about the book writing process. How do I get started? I have an idea. I can't wait to write. I've got this fascinating thing that I want to tell the world. I want to tell my story, or I want to tell this or that.
Yes.
And I get this all the time. And I've boiled it down, Chris, to, I think there's 3 kinds of authors. I think there's the ones who, from the time they were little, they enjoyed writing, and they still enjoyed writing. They went to school for writing, and they come out and they want to be a writer, whether it's a writer for a newspaper or an author or whatever it wants to be. That's their business, their primary business. And then there's those people who hit something big. They're a politician, they're a movie star, they're a rock and roller, whatever. And some ghostwriter approaches them and says, hey, I want to write a book. You and I are going to do it together, but it's really me, and you put your name on it, and then we'll put it out there. And then there's the other authors, and I think this is where you and I fit in. Yeah. I had no intention of writing a book. I had no intention of being an author. I just started writing notes and stories and letters to, thoughts about what my daughter should grow up thinking about and what she should chase after. And then it became stories of my friends and entrepreneurship and the whole blue collar, the stigma and how there's great opportunity, which you write about in your book as well a bit. So where did your author come from? Where did that happen?
So backtracking a little bit, it's interesting because it went podcast, business, book. And, not to go too far back, but so at Lucia, a lot of these advisors, they've worked there forever, and they're just happy doing what they're doing. And I was kind of this may come as a shocker to you, a unique cat in the crew, because I've always done my own thing. And the chairman, who's like a big brother in me, still one of our best family friends, came up to my wedding, all that good stuff. we were having conversations, and he kind of knew. He's like, okay, we got to figure something out for this guy, because if not, he's going to go do it. Like, he's outgrowing it. He's going to do his own thing. And so how that really spun up was in 2020, obviously COVID, everything locked down, yada yada. I started to do my show, and that's probably in and of itself a whole nother story. But the show was initially not even a real show. Like, I kind of just made it up, and people bought into it. And I was like, okay, I've got to make this legit. So fast forward 2021, the show comes out, and then the show started picking up steam. And I always knew I wanted to have my name on a business, but in our industry, as you both are well aware, and then probably fortunately not aware enough, it's a very complex business. And
Sure.
so it took me about a decade to go, all right, now's the time. But I'm not going to screw over the people that gave me a chance. So podcast business, and then as that was all growing, I started to realize, okay, my business is growing because we only work with accredited investors now. And for those of you that are listening that don't know, that means you're worth $1 million, or you make 200 or 300,000 or more if you're married.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that means I'm eliminating a lot of people here, but I love helping people. The podcast was a way of giving people free advice. And I'm like, okay, but people want to pay. Like, there's a lot of middle ground in there.
Sure.
And so I knew that my framework could be written into a book. And I told myself, I'm going to do it. I am going to do it. One thing is Russell Brunson's books, Expert Secrets, that was gifted to me a couple of years ago. I'm like, oh, well, that, I'm a shameless cloner. I was like, there's my framework for the next decade. And so one of the things was, I'm going to have to write a book on this. And so that's how the book came about. Now, how it came about, as far as like publishing and all that, that's, as you know, you could go a million different ways with it. I had no knowledge I had knowledge of publishing houses, but I'm like, look, I'm not J.K. Rowling. Like, they don't give a rat's ass about the cap and capitalize yet.
Well, let's do that. Let me interrupt you there, because that's
Yeah.
very interesting, and I'm getting to that. I want to do a couple of quick how-tos, because I'm sure you get asked this a lot, and I know that I do as well.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I came at it from a uneducated ditch digger's perspective, and who wants to listen to a ditch digger? But I just started telling stories, and what I love about your book is when I read it, I can hear your voice, and that's a compliment, because people have told me the same thing. I can actually hear you speaking.
Yes.
And I love that. So let's give some people who are thinking about writing books out there some value real quick. So
okay.
What was your you said, okay, I'm going to write a book. What was we'll kind of do these in a little speed round order.
All right,
what was the first thing you did when you said, okay, I'm going to write a book? You bought paper and pencils, or you got your laptop? What was the first thing you did?
So the first thing I did was I asked myself, when was the moment that made me extremely excited to share with the world what is now Capitalize Your Finances? And I just started writing all the things that got me hyped up about it. And then I started writing, to the best of my abilities, my chronological journey. And then what I did is I reordered it to what I think would be the proper framework had I known all of this today. And so then when I had that outline, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's just an outline. I go, yeah, but like, it's an outline that gets people hooked into where you're at. Because the best books out there tell a story. Your book, which I loved, okay? Yes, it gives some amazing advice, but why is it so great? It's because it gives stories. Hooked, relatable stories. For me, you know how many finance people there are out there? There's hundreds. Right. A lot of them suck. So for me, it's like, okay, I've just got to be authentically me. And I know I've got a unique vocal presence about myself. And so I'm just going to be that. And so once I had that outline down, then the next thing was really simple. Any moment I had in between meetings, or in afternoons or evenings, if Steph, went out with her friends or whatever, I would be at home writing my book. on my computer, and I would basically knock out a chapter. My goal was a chapter a day. And obviously, it's not that easy, but it was pretty dang close. The most difficult part for me was not writing the book, because then you have this huge Microsoft Word document in my case.
Right.
And I go, okay, how am I going to get this on? Because you can't just load up a Word document. And that's just, being a man of faith, God aligned me with some great people. In fact, one of our guests on our show, who you need to connect with, Jim Vinosky, he does the manufacturing podcast, and he's a columnist for Forbes. And I'm like, oh, Jim's going to know how to write a book, duh. And he didn't have a clue, but he had two friends that were authors. He introduces me to two of them. One of them, the first one gave me a ton of great advice, but not like black and white stuff. The other guy, he was nice, absolute discombobulated mess, like unorganized, but he slipped out that, hey, my publisher was so-and-so. So, halfway through this call where I'm like, I'm probably never going to talk to this guy again. Write down his publisher. I hit her up, Kate Colbert, Silvertree Communications. And she goes, this is what I do. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And basically what she did is she did all of the steps in between. So you're calling Library of Congress and getting a number, Bowker and getting everything set up so your book can actually be on shelves across the country. She connected me with George Stevens, shout out to George, who did the cover of the book in the artwork. And then he basically Amazonified it. So you take the Word document,
Sure,
and you put it into what it is, their KDP or PDF equivalent. So once all that was done, then the next thing they enlightened me on was, okay, this is how you're going to do a pre-release. So for 30 days, right?
All right, let me stop you there, because I want to get a little more stuff for the people that are thinking about this. So
okay.
So basically, you grabbed your laptop, you had some ideas, you created an outline first. Okay, very, very good advice, because that's one of the things that you can't do when you're writing a book is say, I'm going to start with chapter 1 and I'm going to write through to chapter 10. What I know about writing a book is when a thought hits you, you sit down and you write about it. And sometimes that's going to be 600 words. Sometimes that's going to be 1,800 words. But when a thought hits you, you just do it. And for me, it was, I'd be on the golf course walking down 18 fairway going, you know what, that's a good idea. And I'd go home, I'd skip the beer and I'd go home and I'd just write until my hand was sore. And then I might not write for a couple, 3 or 4 days or even a week. And then another thought would hit me and boom, I would go write about that, or I would interview somebody. So did you have a, was it spontaneous for you, or was it very heavily scheduled for you to do your writing? And was there a place that you sat each time to do it, or did that change?
It was heavily scheduled. So for me, once I was done, and I live and die by my schedule and my calendar, and clients know this about me. Like, until I'm done, until I have them on the next meeting, we're not hanging up. We're not done. Right. Same thing with even my massage therapist. Every 2 weeks, walk downstairs. He goes, all right, 2 weeks. What does it look like? Boom, done. Shake hands. Out you go. Same thing with my book. So once I wrote a chapter, I said, okay, do I have the next calendar writing block on the docket? And if I don't, and my wife, I mean, it probably drove her crazy. In fact, I know it did. But until I had that done, I am not getting up. And I wrote the entire book from this chair. So Perfect. Did not change.
So a couple of differences there. I wrote it totally unscheduled. I wrote it, sometimes 3 days in a row. Sometimes I didn't go for a week or two. Sometimes I did it at night, sometimes in the morning. Sometimes it was at work. Sometimes it was thinking on the golf course or wherever I was. So, there are different ways to get to bite the same apple, as they say, right? So,
yes.
What was, you say you wrote yours at your desk, every word. So I wrote mine all over the place, including a couple of chapters in Jamaica at Ian Sterling's house, who wrote all the James Bond movies.
Yes.
I wrote at that same Ian Fleming, I should say, at that same desk that he wrote at. So it's where it hits you, and I think that's the thing for people out there who are thinking about writing a book. There isn't a specific and methodical way. You talked about how you communicate earlier. I love the fact that you use self-deprecating humor in the book. It makes you real. It makes it authentic. What was the reason that you decided to do that? I mean, you beat yourself up in a comical and funny way as you're introducing these new concepts. Why did you do that?
There's a couple reasons. So number one, like, and this is in the beginning of my book, I genuinely believe this, that I was never the most X, whatever that is, fastest, quickest, smartest, most attractive, whatever the case is. I wasn't, not fast or like dumb, right? But I never was quite up to that. And, this goes back to my childhood. I was always expected to kind of be that level. And so for me, and I've always just been a funny guy. Like I love humor. Life is too short.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. But then over time, what really turned me off about corporate, you can't joke anymore. You can't make fun. You can't make fun of anyone. You can't make fun of yourself. Like, and for me, it's like, well, that's dumb, because what's the point of life? And then also the last part was, no one, I shouldn't say no one, very few people are unequivocally real. And when you read these books, it's like there's no trials and tribulations whatsoever. And one of our common one of our friends in common, Ryan Dusick, what I loved about his book is he just went everywhere, highs, low, like very low.
Yeah, bared it all out there. Absolutely.
And for me, I don't want to look back and go, gosh, I left a lot on the table. For me, I'm also very black and white. I don't want people, and I get this from my mom's mom, my grandma who passed away. She just got it out there. So there was a combination of humor. I have a little bit more of a potty mouth, my grandma. Sorry, grandma. And then, I'm basically her verbal cues on steroids. And so, like my brother will always say, yeah, you're never going to go, man, I wonder what Chris is thinking about this. It's never going to happen.
Love that.
And that's why I did it, because it's like, I might as well get it all out there. You can take it or leave it. My mom read a crazy fact a couple days ago. Crazy to her, it wasn't to me. 10% of people out there will never like you, period. And she was a little bummed by that. I'm like, that statistically, that's brilliant. So if the next person you meet hates your guts, that means the next 9 are going to love you. Like, you should be euphoric. And don't try earning those 10. Just, go with the remaining 90 that like or love you. And some of them won't like you enough. So maybe you get to 60 or 70%. Well, that's millions of people. And so for me, it's just, I don't know. I just genuinely don't really care what people think about me. And
that is such good advice. I can tell you that even on social media, I'll come up with the greatest point ever, and it'll get out there. It'll be loved by so many people. And there's that one guy who just throws out this comment, and you wonder, like, okay, what's his world really like? Because 78 people thought this was genius, and this one guy has to throw this junk at me. And it's like, I mean, you got to be thick-skinned to get into any of this world.
Yeah. And, well, you do. And it's funny you bring up the social media. So my brother, Tyler, runs our social media, and that's really cool to work with my brother. My brother was my first best friend, and
nice.
We're having a blast together with it. So my brother is a much more risk-averse social media person, and most people are. And we were doing shorts and reels for Instagram and YouTube. And so one of the things that I've learned a long time ago was from an investor I look up to a ton. And he told me the first time I meet someone, there's two things. The first time I meet someone, I ask myself after that interaction, do I ever want to see them again? And if I don't, I don't. He's not rude about it. He's just
No,
done.
it's
And then
choice.
on the flip side, you have so many people in your life. And especially if you're putting yourself out there like we are. And one thing I've learned was fast forward a year and ask yourself, if I didn't see this person, whoever it is, for a year and I didn't miss them, why are they in my life right now? And then gone. So I told my brother that. We do the recording. His face is just wide-eyed. He's like, dude, that's gonna rustle some feathers. I'm like, dude, you know what, man? And I love my brother to death. My brother has the heart like my mom, where he just wants everyone to be happy and all that. I'm like,
Right.
your biggest thing holding you back is you care way too much about what people think about you. I don't care. Like, I don't need to do any of this. I've told a lot of people this. I don't need to do social media, my book, brand, speaking. We're coming out with courses later this year. I could contently focus on my practice and be happier than a clam. But I know God put me on this earth to do what I'm doing.
Yeah,
And so
for
I'm
sure.
going to do it. And if people don't like me, then, kick rocks, man.
Another question I get asked all the time, and for me, I avoided this because I just didn't write until I had an idea. Did you ever get writer's block along the way, and how did you overcome that?
I don't think I had traditional writer's block where I mean, you've watched Talladega Nights, right? With Ricky
Sure, yeah.
Bobby, where I don't know what to do with my hands. I never had that moment where it's just like, I'm deer in the headlights. I'm screwed. I had moments where I thought to myself, okay, how am I going to contort this where this is a very technical topic, and how do I make this very technical topic fun and then also humorous, where the self-deprecation comes in? Because then you're like, okay, you know what, like, we've gotten a good laugh and all that, but now I understand, how to, knock off 10% in taxes I'm never gonna have to pay. Like, that's where I had some struggle. But the difference was, I think for me, was I already knew the framework, because I had built it for, at that point, 18 years of my life up until that point. So I knew the order of it. It was just more the fine tuning, where sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to go, get some coffee, walk outside for 5 minutes. And then I'm like, oh, it hit me pretty quick. But I never had traditional writer's block. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So I avoided that just by not writing until I had a thought in my head. And that's why for some people, I wanted to get that on the table, because you can either do it in a scheduled way. And for you, you literally had an 18-year head start, because you had 18 years of figuring out what the whole framework was going to be. And then you kind of filled in the middle.
Yep.
For me, it was a little bit more of a linear process, because I was discovering other people's experiences, and I was discovering other people's trials and tribulations and how they overcame those things. And I was finding more people to interview and whatnot. So it was more of a linear scenario. So yeah, it took me about 8 months to write my book, but not steady. It was 8 months of here, there, and everywhere. It sounds
really
to me like
fast.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it took you more of a concentrated period of time than that.
So shockingly, no. So, because for me, when I was writing it, I okay, you shouldn't tell yourself like, oh my gosh, I know all of this. But if you're writing a book, you should know all of this. But then for me, going up against, so if you're going to do anything in life, you need to know your competition like the back of your hand. You need to be obsessive with it, to the point where, so you remember Steve Smith, the wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers? Okay, scrappy, loved watching him. And I don't think he ever got the credit he deserved on how he studied his opponents. And he got to the point where, like, I don't know if I would ever do this, but, let's say that some cornerback's, mom died the weekend before. He's going to use that on the field because he's trying to win. Like, he'll do anything to win. And it showed. And for me, I always looked at it going, okay, I'm not, pick your poison, right? Jim Cramer, Susie Orman, who I've been doing this for a boatload of years, and I can just say it, and I'm older, and so therefore it's magic. So I need to have some concrete backing on this, and you superset that not to get my bodybuilding terms on, with my humor and just how I talk, then there's true conviction. So to actually get the data to back what I knew over the years, again, it didn't take as long because I keep all of my research. But I think the book itself took me about a year and a half to write. And then from the publishing aspect, that took probably four months-ish. So
Okay. And so there's another piece of it. So there's this question about once you get this in your hand, okay, with the advent of software, right, and all the apps that are out there, it's never been easier to self-publish a book because all the tools are right there, from finding people for cover design to doing all the things that you said, like point of purchase scenarios and all that stuff. I was fortunate because I had some publishers kind of chasing my book. There was 5 or 6 of them that were trying to go. They call it an auction, where they kind of go at you and they try to woo you to give you their opportunity to publish the book, obviously. And for me, again, I didn't think the book would go 10 feet as I was writing it, much less the 10 miles that it's gone, and yours as well. So you decided to work through an actual publisher. I did the same thing. Did you have thoughts about self-publishing it? And what would you tell the audience about the difference between doing it yourself or trying to find someone to back you like that?
So to tweak that a little bit, so Silvertree, they're basically like a publishing like coach. So I did self-publish fully, but they just helped me get it from online. So if you're going to self-publish, you do not want to come across as if you've self-published. And what I mean by that,
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, if you put your book out there and there's really no publisher attached to it, even if it's self-published, there's no checks and balances to make it legit. No one's going to get that book out there. I would tell you pros and cons. Like, you went through a publishing house, and there's some amazing pros with that, because again, they wanted to lure you in. They're going to, in theory, do a lot of the marketing and all that. For me, maybe it's just because I am not as to be politically appropriate and correct, experienced on earth as you, to have enough of those people, calling to me. I've never had that. That's the one thing I've never really had. I've never had people begging me to do whatever. And you also add on the fact that growing up, I was always brought just to the edge to be reminded that I didn't know enough about something, which is why I have no relationship with one of my family members. You add all of that up with a very competitive mindset, which is what I have. You've got a very deadly man on your hands.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
For me, I knew, okay, writing this book, it's going to be no different than when I got into health and fitness and in bodybuilding and powerlifting. So I've had Crohn's my whole life. I was never supposed to do it. My gastroenterologist laughed at me when I told him I was going to step on stage. And I did it. And I was great. I've been in remission for 11 years since I started. And then when I started the business, it was the same thing. Like, oh, do or die. Everyone's going to laugh at me. I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to win. And then the book. Okay, great. Hay House, all of these big books, publishers, they're not going to want to sniff me because they don't think I'm good enough. So I will prove to them that I'm great. And I will tell you, self-publishing, right? Pros and cons. The biggest pro for me is you can control every aspect of it.
That's correct.
And that's really huge. I'm not trying to knock any of the big guys out there, because someday they'll be calling. Maybe not now. But for those of you that are looking to write a book, if you decide to go the self-publishing route, for which the majority of you, I would say, do it. Get a publishing coach like I did. Also make sure someone does your artwork and all of that. The biggest hurdle that people don't tell you about in writing a book, the hardest part is not writing the book and getting it on shelves. The hardest part is the marketing and selling of it.
Well, that's where we're going next. So, first off, I totally agree. People ask me about the process of writing the book, and my process was I gathered 12 legal pads full of words that I hand wrote with a pen, or many pens.
God.
I actually had a guy in a plane one time. I'm sitting next to him and I'm writing feverishly, and he says, "What are you doing?" Because I'm shaking my hand, like I got a sore wrist. And he says, I said, "I think I'm writing a book." He goes, "Okay, great, but you're like writing it, like we have these things you can type on." And I said, "I know, but every time I type 3 words, I have to erase 2 of them and start over." So the whole voice to email thing has been a godsend for me, believe me.
Yes.
But so yeah, for me, writing the book was by far the easiest part. There's no question, and people think that's the hardest. But so here's a stat that I found that was very interesting, and that is that, first off, when I wrote the book, then you had to find an editor. I found an editor in New York who had a whole stable of ghostwriters who could help me clean it up and organize it. And they added about maybe 10% to the book. I had 70,000 words. They added another 7 in just research and facts and backing up and that kind of thing. And then it goes from there to you find an agent, and then the agent represents you, and then they shop it to all these publishers, but not before you have some PR and you have some social media gain going on and whatnot. And then it's shopped around. And then, you finally launch this book. The thing that I wasn't prepared for was only 1 in 12,000 authors ever sells more than 1,000 copies of their book in their lifetime. Most books sell 250 copies or less. I found that to be shocking because there's all this work put into it. You would think, wow, this thing's going to go crazy. Now, fortunately, mine did. I mean, it sold really well. And again, I'm very, very blessed for that. But you have to be ready for that grind, because the grind of marketing the book from that point forward is by far the hardest part. There's no question. I've been on 165 podcasts in the last year and a half, and I love doing them. So that's fun. But, you're out there marketing the book, you're doing book signings, you're doing all those kinds of things. And if you love your story and you believe in what it is, then that's easy for you to do. And I can tell by you and your book that that's how it's going. So, it had to feel good when you landed that publishing deal. But, my question to you is, when you finally held this in your hand for the very first time, a marketable book.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you feel right then and there? Describe that for us.
So I remember actually, so funny story on that. So, the pre-release happens and I told myself, I'm going to get it at the same time as everyone else. And it's funny because a lot of people started posting the book, and my own copy was on back order. So I didn't get it until I think a week or 2 later. And
Wow.
for me, I got a little nervous and all that, because I'm like, oh gosh, what if these books are, it doesn't work, blah, blah. And I remember I picked it up. First off, my wife picked it up and she was just ecstatic. And my wife has just a heart of gold. She is an angel. Opposites attract, I guess. And so she was just super proud. And I remember picking it up, and the first thing I thought, it got really quiet for me. Just the world just kind of just shut down. And I have this grind of a year and a half, but you could argue 18 years of hard work in my hand. And this is a curse. I'm always looking to better myself in every aspect. This is not the last book I'm going to write. We have a couple in the hopper. I'm going to start another one later this year. And for me, it was almost the same mentality of Emmitt Smith. So Emmitt Smith, there's this famous story of he won the Super Bowl, and the day after, he's in the gym benching 315, and I think it was Aikman walked up to him and was like, "What are you doing? Don't you want to rest?" Right? And racks the weight, sits up, takes a couple deep breaths, And then he gets back to it, and Troy's like, what do you like, dude, go home, like rest. And he's like, that's 60 second, that is my rest. Like I'm not giving, there's no gap. And
Right.
for me,
Right.
I had that equivalent mentally of the 315, where I'm going, okay, I'm going to give myself this 30 seconds, but I got to get back to it. And I wish I appreciated that moment more. I really did. You know, not to digress off of it, but when you start your business the first time, again, those first couple of years were great, and they sucked because you're broke as hell.
Right.
You have
Absolutely.
almost no hope, and you can't be in the moment. I don't care what anyone tells you, because you're in the moment is, you know, scraping pennies together and saying, oh, I can pay for this next month's rent, or whatever the case is. So when I started the podcast, I said, oh, I'm going to enjoy every moment. And I wasn't as good at that. And now that I've gotten through this book, I told myself, okay, the next one, now that I know the whole process, I'm going to enjoy every single second. So that robbed me of what I would say should have been the prime enjoy. But that's also what makes me great, because in my industry, you've got to process things quick, because if you just marinate, you're lost.
Yeah, you got it. So in the final 10 or 12 minutes that we have left,
Yes.
I want to show the cover again. Okay. Capitalize your finances. And you are definitely an alliterator. You have some really good alliteration here going. How to the how to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. So I applaud you on your alliteration there. Who's the target reader of your book, and what would you want them to get out of it?
Yeah. So the target reader of our book. So I wrote the book so that no matter where you're at in your financial journey or your life, you can read this book and there is no way that you have any question on what to do at any point in time throughout the rest of your life. Now, on social media, the majority of our readers, and followers, are ages 28 through 34, predominantly dudes. You're not sexist, that's just how it is. And a lot of these guys just want to better themselves financially and have that runway for the rest of their lives. I can tell you half of my clients are between 60 and 70. And it's funny because a lot of them, they don't even really know I have a podcast. Like they get it and they're like, oh, okay, right. It's kind of cool. And they have bought the book and they're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had this when I was like 18. I wish I had that. So the majority of our readers, I would say, are 34 and under. 20 to 34 is that prime target, but we're starting to pick up some teenagers, which I actually wish I wish more teenagers were reading this, because it's going to set them up for the rest of their life.
Well, and you did something. I mean, it's the perfect segue to my next question, because it's exactly where I'm headed. So one of the things in your book, and I again, you talk in such simple terms, and you're funny and you're self-deprecating, and I love that because it makes you real, and it helps people to understand that, this is stuff that you can do. You just have to learn it. Math and numbers and compounding interest is an amazing thing if you use it to your advantage, right? So, and investing. One of the things that you say in the book, I'm just going to read one piece of it. 4 of 10 investors think it's going to take a miracle for them to retire financially secure. And 60% of investors believe that they would have to substantially downsize and live on Social Security if their money went away. So my thing has always been, if Social Security and those types of safety nets are such a problem, there's such an onerous problem to our society, to government, because they're always worried about them running out, and are they going to be here when I'm older, and can I rely upon it or whatever. My feeling is, because the power of compounding money is so amazing and investing, why aren't we teaching this at the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old levels, so that those kids, in a very simple way, will never have to rely upon these types of social service programs, right? Or at least they'll never have to worry about, that's my only way of living. So right now, you're sitting in front of 10,000 guidance counselors and or school superintendents in a stadium. Okay. What does Chris say to them to change that narrative?
So it's funny you say that, because next week I'm actually speaking to a local high school, and I think there's going to be, I think the teacher said, and this is not all at once. It'd be pretty cool if it was like 800 students.
It's great.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I told him, I'm like, I don't know if you're like, you know, with my self-deprecating humor, I'm like, are you ready for like what I may say? Cause like, I don't know what I'm going to say. So like, I guess my short answer is I don't know what I would say, but on a serious note, I get why it's not taught in schools. I'm not saying that's right, but I get why. How many people have actually been brought up with true financial literacy in their house? None.
Yeah.
I thought I was. I wasn't even close to, like, I didn't even scratch the surface. And most people would have said, I'm farther than 99% of people, which I would actually agree with. I think there's a lot of variables. Number one, Wall Street makes it way too complex. Number two, a lot of people in the community that can teach, not just teachers, guidance counselors and all that, are they that great with their finances? Then why should they be teaching it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that could be another argument. What I would actually do, if I had 10,000 guidance counselors, I'd get kicked out of school so quick. But if I had 10,000 guidance counselors and teachers in front of me, I would give them my framework. And then I would give them a week. And then I would come back to them and I would ask and answer, I would answer every question that they could throw at me. Because by the time they were done, then they would have their capitalize your finances framework that they can literally just hand over to their students in a course. That's one thing I learned. Colin Slaybach, who's become a good friend of mine, he's a professor of finance at NYU. He's been on my show. He was telling me, a lot of these teachers and professors, they're kind of lazy. Like, they're not going to go and create their own framework. They want to take a framework and teach it. And that's what I would do. And actually, that's what I'm doing right now. Not to, self-publish or self-promote myself here, but December 1st, Capitalize Your Finances, the courses will be available online for a whopping $250. And so if people buy that, then they can kind of create whatever they want to based on that baseline. So that's what I would tell these teachers is you need to ask every question you can think financially. After a week of thinking about it, because it's going to take that amount of time, I answer all of those questions, and then you've got your framework in head, and you can go and give that to your students. There's a person I quote a ton in my book, and I promise I won't ramble about it. His name's Dr. Craig Israelson out of BYU. And one of the most underrated interviews I've ever done. And he had a quote that hit me so hard. He says, when I teach my students about planning, I tell them investing and planning is like salsa. And everyone loves salsa. Some like it sweet, some like it spicy, some like it fruity. But as long as you understand your salsa, you're golden. And that's the beauty with capitalizing your finances. On my show, when you came on, you were talking about, hey, like, I've been in more commercial real estate and REITs, and I've done my own businesses and all that. That's your salsa.
Right.
For me, it's kind of the same thing. I'm more of a business guy and utilized what I call the endowment model. That's an episode coming out shortly. And I utilize everything you were saying and then some. We have some people like, Warren Buffett for years invested in like 5 or 6 businesses, and that was it.
Sure.
That was it. So as long as you understand your salsa, which is the equivalent of whatever capitalizing your financial framework looks like, that's your ticket. And I don't think people even have that base framework, which is why I'm doing everything that I'm doing today.
Beautiful. Well, again, congratulations on the book. And I love the fact that you have a course coming out, because I do as well. And I've always believed that a book read that sits on a shelf without any action is just a trophy. and,
Yes.
and, you know, like a largemouth bass mounted on the wall. I mean, you might remember the day you were there, but you know, what has it given you since then? So I congratulate you on the course. I wish you all the success in the world. And I would encourage all the people listening to this show to make sure that they look you up and figure that out. So I'm gonna ask you just 3 speed questions from my book, Blue Collar Cash, all about comfort, peace, and freedom. So the very first question is, you know, if we all think about the nirvana that we chase, which is our perfect lived life, our perfect envisioned life, you know, my feeling is it always comes down to what makes you comfortable, what makes you peaceful, and what makes you free or spontaneous. So in Chris's world, what does comfort look like to you?
So what does comfort look like to me? Comfort to me now is actually being uncomfortable professionally. Personally, comfort for me, going out in our commercial gym in our garage, clanging and banging in the Panagiotu powerhouse, coming inside, spending time with my lovely little Abigail Ray and my amazing wife, Stephanie. That's my comfort.
Love it. Love it. Where do you find the most peace?
I find the most peace personally in our gym, professionally in my client service room / reading room. We installed that in my office because all of the best business people I've met have a dedicated place to think. And that's where I go to be at peace. And I'm at the most peace in my life where I can profoundly think. Perfect.
Love it. So where are you then, if you're thinking about, and I love your answers because you've gone both balance, work and life balance. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Where would you find that you are the most free?
And by the way, a bill will be coming for the work and life balance in the mail. Where am I the most free? I'm going to start professionally. Every aspect of what I'm doing in my business, my podcast, my brand, it's great because I am positively untapped and unhinged. I can do whatever the heck I need to do. And I know it's for the greater good of people. Personally, where I'm the most free, that's an easy one. My wife, my baby girl, and yours truly in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Love it.
On the lake, surrounded by nothing other than God, faith, and country.
Beautiful. Beautiful. It has been such a pleasure talking to you, Chris. I'm glad that we hooked up those few months ago and got this relationship going. It's something that I think is valuable. You know, I love the fact that you and I could share with others how they might be able to write a book and the advice we might give them. And then also to tie in exactly what your book is about so that people can take advantage of it. Strongly encourage people to read it. There's a lot of great stuff in there to get yourself financially straight and think about your future. Tell us where we can find the book and what your website is and where we can find more about you.
Yes. So for the book, head on over to Amazon.com, type in Capitalize Your Finances. You can attempt to type in my last name, but don't hurt yourself. Capitalize Your Finances. Snag the book, hardcover, Kindle, paperback. If you're wanting to listen to my podcast, we are on Spotify and Apple Pod, Capitalize Your Finances, where you can listen to Ken Rusk's episode coming out very shortly. And we're also on YouTube. And then if you want to follow me on social media, LinkedIn, Christopher Panagiotu, Twitter, Cap and Capitalize, and Instagram, Cap and Capitalize.
Chris Panagiotu, I really appreciate you being with us today, and go Cap, right?
Yes, absolutely. Keep capitalizing is our slogan.
Keep
so I will always keep capitalizing.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you.
See ya.